The band was playing soft jazz when the glass doors opened, and the entire hall held its breath without knowing why. No one announced it. No one expected it. No one had time to prepare. But it only took the tall silhouette crossing the amber glow of the foyer for a silent wave to ripple across the tables, like a wind you can't see, only feel. It can't be. He actually came? My God. Some just widened their eyes. Others froze with their cutlery midair. A woman dropped her purse on the floor. A distracted waiter nearly spilled a tray of champagne. It was him. Michael Jordan entered with no entourage, no press, no fanfare. A perfectly tailored dark suit. Subtle tie. Reserved expression. He walked with the calm of someone who's crossed packed arenas, yet carried on his shoulders something that had nothing to do with trophies, titles, or fame. In that space, he wasn't the global star. He was the bride's ex-husband. At the front, under an arch of white flowers, Juanita Vanoy laughed at something the groom had whispered in her ear. Her dress, elegant and mature, highlighted a woman who had learned, over the years, how to rebuild herself. She looked serene, at peace, until Michael's shadow approached the makeshift aisle crossing the hall. A collective sigh spread through the rows of chairs. One of the sons from the first marriage, Marcus, noticed before anyone else. He turned his head, froze, and for a moment, his eyes revealed something between shock and nostalgia. "Mom," he instinctively whispered. Juanita followed her son's gaze. When she saw Michael, the smile on her face didn't vanish, but it changed in nature. It went from light to heavy. Old memories flooded her mind, like a tide that ignores levees, walls, or borders. Divorce, whispered arguments in silent hallways. Lawyers, silences more painful than any shouting match. The day she decided she would no longer try to save him from everything nor save herself with him. And now, there he was. On the day she was saying yes to another man. The groom, Richard Thompson, noticed, belatedly. He turned his head curiously, expecting to see just another distinguished guest after all. Juanita's circle had always been filled with notable names. When his eyes met Michael's, his jaw tightened for just a second. He was a confident, mature man, but still human. He knew exactly who he was sharing that space with at that moment. Juanita took a deep, discreet breath. She couldn't back away. Not now. The officiant, confused, looked toward the organizers at the side of the hall, as if asking for guidance on what to do. No one knew. Michael didn't speed up, nor did he hesitate. He walked down the side aisle, avoiding the center stage. He stopped near one of the rows, nodding to a few familiar faces. There were people from the past. Family, friends, former business partners, distant relatives. Some greeted him with restrained enthusiasm. Others avoided eye contact, unsure whose side of that old marriage they were still on. Until he stopped. Not in front of Juanita. Not in front of Richard. He stopped in front of the row where the children sat. Marcus stood up without thinking. "Dad," he said, his voice mixing surprise and something almost childlike, despite being an adult. Next to him, Jeffrey watched seriously, trying to hide his emotion. Jasmine, further back, discreetly wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Michael placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder and, for a few seconds, the entire celebration faded away. "I wasn't going to miss this," he murmured quietly. Not today. No one knew if he was referring to the wedding itself or to something deeper, older. "I thought," Marcus began, but swallowed the rest. "That wasn't the time for an... I thought you wouldn't come." Michael just nodded. Then, finally, he lifted his eyes toward the altar. His gaze met Juanita's. It was brief, but intense enough to be impossible to ignore. There was an ocean there. Choices, wounds, victories, pride, regrets whispered in the middle of the night. She didn't look away. The band, not understanding what was happening, kept playing. The officiant shuffled his notes, trying to keep the ceremony going as if nothing extraordinary was unfolding. Michael quietly took a seat at the back, at a table that seemed to have been reserved for unexpected guests. The maitre d', tense, tried to act like it was part of the plan. When the officiant cleared his throat and officially began the ceremony, everyone turned to the front again. Even so, his presence lingered in the air. Every sideways glance inevitably landed on that face that had graced countless covers and also held deeply personal memories from that family core. Juanita tried to reconnect with the moment. Juanita and Richard have chosen to write their own vows, the officiant said, smiling. Let's hear them. Dan like scram. Gram scram. Richard took a deep breath, holding her hands. His voice came out firm, even with full awareness of who was sitting behind. I never imagined I'd marry someone who had already lived an entire life before me, he began, with disarming honesty. A story full of chapters known to the whole world, and others completely private. And I never wanted to replace any of that. I only wanted to be part of what came next. Some guests smiled, touched by the sincerity. You've shown me that adult love isn't built on fantasies, but on daily choices, he continued. I accept everything you were, everything you are, and everything you'll still become. Your scars, your triumphs, your fears, and your courage. While he spoke, Michael listened in silence. Those words touched places he knew well. The same ones where, once, he had tried to be husband, father, idol, provider, all at once, until he realized no one can carry that many weights without breaking somewhere. When it was Juanita's turn, the room took on a different texture. She held the microphone, looked at Richard with calm affection, and for a few seconds, hesitated. Maybe she was mentally selecting her phrases. Maybe she was battling between what she wanted to say and what could be said in front of so many eyes. Richard, she began, her voice slightly shaky. When you came into my life, it wasn't an empty field waiting for flowers. It was land turned over by storms, full of marks, cracks, and pieces I didn't even know how to fit together. A soft laugh spread among some emotional guests. I wasn't a blank page, she continued, and even so, you chose to write with me. You didn't try to erase anything. You didn't compete with what came before. You just held my hand and said, let's go from here. At a side table, Michael briefly closed his eyes. The phrase echoed deeper than he'd like to admit. Today, in front of our children, our friends, and people who were part of my past, she made a nearly imperceptible pause. At that point, I choose you. I choose to grow old by your side. I choose to create new chapters, without denying any of the previous ones, but without being trapped by them. Many eyes filled with tears. It wasn't a youthful speech about perfect love. It was a vow from someone who knew the pain of seeing a marriage fall apart. The officiant continued with the ceremony. Exchange of rings, formal promises. The kiss, sealing a new union. Somewhere deep down, however, more than just a cycle was closing. A different kind of movement was beginning. When the applause erupted, Michael stood up for a few moments. Not to steal the moment, nor to be seen, but because he needed to breathe. The weight of it all felt like it was crushing him from within. He quietly stepped out onto the side balcony of the venue, where the nighttime Chicago air cut through the inner warmth with a soft chill. The city lights flickered in the distance, reminding him that the world outside remained the same, indifferent to that silent reunion. From the inner pocket of his jacket, he pulled out a small object. This time, it wasn't just a random envelope lost among bills and old papers. It was something smaller, more rigid, kept with almost obsessive care. A kind of slim box, made of dark velvet, weathered by time. He opened it. Inside, a gold ring that had never made its way back to Juanita's finger after the divorce. Not because she refused, not because he gave up, but because the right moment simply never came back. It was the ring he bought years after the separation, when for a few months he believed there might still be a real chance of a fresh start. An apology that never left his pocket. A gesture stuck between lawyers, packed schedules, travels, built-up resentments, and wounded pride. Michael never returned the jewel, never presented it, never told anyone about it. Now, he held that small box in the palm of his hand, watching the city lights reflect off the metal. Too late, he murmured, unaware that someone was watching him. It's always too late for something, isn't it? Said a female voice behind him. Michael turned around. Jasmine, his daughter, was standing at the glass door, wrapped in a thin shawl, her hair in an elegant bun, her gaze too firm for someone with such a youthful face. He slowly closed the box. Shouldn't you be inside? He tried to deflect. I could ask you the same, she replied, stepping closer. You always escape outside when things get too emotional. He raised an eyebrow. Always? Okay, maybe not always. She smiled lightly, but enough for it to be a pattern. There was affection and slight accusation mixed in her words. Jasmine looked at her father's hands. What's that? Michael considered hiding it for a moment, but gave up. He wasn't there to run from old shadows. He opened the box again, slowly. Jasmine looked, surprised. That's a ring your mother never saw, he replied, summing it all up in one sentence. The silence between them began to carry something extremely delicate. It wasn't just between father and daughter, but between different versions of the same story. You were going to propose to her again, she asked in a whisper. One day I thought I might, he admitted. Then, nothing happened the way I planned. She bit her lower lip, thoughtful. And why did you bring it today? The question sliced through the air like a blade. He took a deep breath. Because today, she's marrying another man. And I needed to decide what to do with this symbol of a chapter that never existed. Jasmine didn't take her eyes off the ring. Are you going to give it to her? Michael put the box back in his pocket. No. At least not the way you're imagining. His daughter's expression hardened slightly. Then why did you come, Dad? Honestly. He stared out at the city ahead, as if seeking courage among the distant lights. Because there's more unfinished business than you all imagine, he replied. And part of it isn't just about your mother and me. It concerns you all too. Jasmine frowned. What do you mean? Michael shifted his gaze, looking at his daughter with unprecedented seriousness. This night isn't just about her wedding, Jasmine. It's about the truth. Things I hid. Things she hid. Things none of you deserve to carry blindly. The young woman's heart began to race. Truth about what, exactly? He took a while to answer. His hand reflexively touched another inner pocket, one that held a small, carefully folded envelope, with contents far heavier than any unoffered ring. About how our marriage really ended, he said at last. And about what happened right after, that you never knew. Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. Inside, the band began another song. The guests started to move toward the bar, the buffet, the dance floor. Toasts would be made. Speeches would follow. Memories would be shared. But out on the balcony, something more serious was beginning to take shape. Dad, Jasmine murmured, if you're going to stir all that up tonight, are you sure you won't ruin the day? Ada, Waith and Waith Menor. Waith Menor. Michael's eyes darkened. Sometimes, the only way for a party to really begin is when lies stop being invited. The phrase hung in the air, and without realizing it, Jasmine understood that this night of celebration was about to become the night when old layers of silence would be peeled away. Whether gently or brutally, it wasn't yet clear. The only certainty was, no one would leave that room exactly the same. The music returned to the hall with more force, now lively, celebrating the official start of the reception. The guests mingled, toasted, hugged Juanita and Richard, took photos among floral arrangements and warm lights decorating the space. Yet, even amid all the euphoria, something invisible lingered in the air. A magnetic field, a silent shift. A 6'6" man seated at the back of the hall carrying decades of unresolved history. Michael returned inside a few minutes after talking with Jasmine. He walked through the glass door, trying to blend into the crowd. Although, it was impossible to go unnoticed. His presence radiated meaning, not importance meaning. People reacted in different ways. Some glanced quickly and looked away. Others stared reverently, as if before a living legend. And there were those trying to decipher whether he was there out of nostalgia, provocation, or guilt. Juanita noticed his return. She was trying to focus on the new husband's hands around her waist, trying to smile, be elegant, keep her composure. But every time Richard turned to speak to someone nearby, she would avert her gaze and, inevitably, find him at the back of the hall. Michael wasn't interested in the dance floor. He was watching and waiting. The children were gathered at a nearby table, chatting amongst themselves. Marcus, the most protective, seemed restless. Jeffrey tried to stay neutral, as he always had in tense family situations. Jasmine didn't take her eyes off her father, and only she knew why. Nearby, Juanita finally gathered courage. She lightly held her dress, walked among guests, and approached her ex-husband. Some people noticed and quietly stepped back, allowing the encounter its own space. She stopped in front of him. He rose calmly. For a few seconds, no one said anything. It was as if entire years were being silently rearranged, pains, guilt, lingering memories, words never spoken. Until Juanita took a deep breath. "You really came." Michael raised an eyebrow, with a hint of restrained irony. "Wasn't I invited?" She hesitated. That question carried more than it seemed. "I didn't think you'd be interested," she replied. "I was interested," he said. "I just wasn't sure." She frowned. Sure about what? Michael looked away for a moment, as if searching for answers somewhere distant in the hall. That this would be the right moment to... He paused, leaving the sentence hanging in the air. "Settle old things." Her expression changed. "On my wedding day? You chose to officially move on today," he said, direct. "I thought maybe it was time I did the same." She crossed her arms, more as a defense mechanism than out of irritation. "I don't know why you talk as if I ever held you captive," she replied. "I never said that," he answered, in a tone too calm to be casual. Her gaze hardened. "Don't cause problems here, Michael." He leaned in just enough so no one else could hear. "Who said it's a problem?" That short sentence lit something inside her, a hunch she had been trying to avoid ever since she saw him enter the hall. He was carrying something serious, something that could change the tone of the entire night. She took a step back. "If you have something to say it now. No audience." Michael looked around. "It's not just for you." Her expression froze. "Michael," she whispered. Apprehensive, "Don't do this." He didn't respond, didn't promise anything, didn't explain, which only increased the weight of the matter. While the two talked, Richard watched from a distance. Over the course of his relationship with Juanita, he had learned to recognize the tones she used when talking to her ex-husband. That specific tone, restrained, tense, heavy, meant she was fighting some kind of internal battle. He walked over to them. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, politely but firmly. Juanita smiled automatically. "Everything's fine." Michael extended his hand to the groom. "Congratulations." The ceremony was beautiful. Richard shook his hand. "Thank you. It's an honor to have you here." Michael looked at him like someone analyzing, not judging. "I hope you two have a long life together," he said. But there was something behind it. Something Richard couldn't decipher. Juanita kept perfect posture, but inside, her stomach twisted. That's when the master of ceremonies announced something no one expected so soon. "Dear guests, in a few minutes we'll begin the speeches. Get your glasses ready." People began to take their seats. Richard smiled, adjusting his jacket. Juanita froze, because, at that exact moment, she saw Michael discreetly slide his hand into the inside pocket of his suit, where he kept the envelope only Jasmine knew about. Her heart raced. "Michael," she said, in an urgent whisper that no one else heard, "you're not going up on that stage." He looked at her, expressionless. "I didn't ask for a microphone. Don't even think about..." Her voice faltered. "Opening that in here." He didn't respond, but he didn't need to. She knew that look. It was the look he had before making definitive decisions on the court, in life, in serious conversations that changed the course of their marriage. Richard gently touched his wife's arm. "Love, they're calling us to the main table." "I'm coming," she said. But her eyes stayed locked on the envelope. As the tables organized for the start of the speeches, some nearby guests began to pick up on the subtle tension between Juanita and Michael. An older woman whispered. She turned pale when he reached for his pocket. Another replied, "He didn't come just to honor. He has something to say." A third concluded, "This is going to end badly. I can feel it." At the kids' table, the mood shifted too. Marcus leaned toward his siblings. Did you guys notice Dad is acting weird? Jasmine was the first to answer, but carefully. He brought things from the past. What kind of things? Jeffrey asked. She swallowed hard. Things that could change how we understand their marriage. Marcus frowned. I don't want to hear any secrets today. Not here. Not at our mother's wedding. Jasmine didn't reply, because she already knew. That secret was coming, whether they wanted it or not. The hall quieted, the lights slightly dimmed. The band softened the melody. The master of ceremonies took the stage. Before we begin the couple's dance, we invite family and close friends to share a few words. Applause. Richard adjusted his shirt cuffs. Juanita grabbed her glass with a trembling hand. The children exchanged tense looks. Michael remained seated, but his eyes were fixed on the main table. The host then called out, "To start, we invite someone very special, who has witnessed much of the bride's life and helped shape the woman she is today." The entire hall turned their heads in the same direction. Michael didn't move, not even a blink. Juanita gripped the glass tightly, her eldest son, Marcus Vanoy, and the tension melted into immediate relief. Marcus stood up, emotional, and walked to the stage while everyone applauded. Juanita exhaled. Her body relaxed just a few millimeters. The threat, for now, had passed, or so she thought. Because while Marcus spoke about love, about his mother's strength, about new beginnings, Michael discreetly opened the envelope on his lap, and its contents fluttered under the hall's soft light. It was a letter, a handwritten text, old, with words he had read hundreds of times over the years. Words that should never have surfaced on such a delicate day. But he was tired of carrying it alone. He folded the letter again, tucked it away, and whispered to himself. After the next toast, Jasmine, at the children's table, saw the gesture and brought her hand to her mouth. The story was about to begin, and the first truth, as painful as it might be, would come out that very night. Marcus was wrapping up the speech on stage with the natural ease that only someone truly proud could display. He spoke about his mother's resilience, about how Juanita had faced silent challenges the world never knew about nights when she thought she'd lose everything and still stayed strong for her children. And, today, seeing you smile here, Mom, I feel like it was all worth it. He concluded, voice breaking. I love you. And I hope this new chapter is light. You deserve it. Applause filled the hall. Juanita discreetly wiped away a tear. Richard held her hand with pride. And the only one who didn't clap was Michael, not out of disdain, but because his hand was occupied holding the already opened envelope, as if keeping it between his fingers would stop the past from slipping out before the right moment. Jasmine watched her father with growing concern. She knew that look. It was his look before a decisive shot. Absolute focus. Held breath. Mind completely locked on an action that would change the course of the night. Dad, she murmured, approaching. Not now, he replied, without breaking his gaze. His hand trembled ever so slightly, but it trembled. The host thanked Marcus and announced there would be a short break before the next toast. Waiters walked around with champagne trays. Couples moved to the dance floor for photos. Children played near the dessert table. Requiem tuae. Requiem tuae. But there was an invisible current of electricity slicing through the room. Some guests began to whisper. Michael is acting strange. Something's going on. They talked outside. Did you see? Juanita got weird when he touched his pocket. A perfect wedding. Flawless. Planned down to the last detail, and yet, the air felt heavy. Richard noticed it. He wasn't an insecure man, but it was impossible to ignore the emotional shadow Michael cast over the room. After all, no one wants the symbolic presence of a wife's past looming over their own wedding. He approached her children. Do you know if something's going on? Marcus replied quickly. Nothing you need to worry about. He's always like this at family events. But Jasmine looked away. Jeffrey remained silent. Richard noticed the hesitation but didn't press. He decided to look for his wife. Juanita was standing near one of the columns, discreetly watching the back of the hall where Michael remained seated. Her new husband approached. Honey, are you okay? Juanita forced a smile. I am. Just processing everything. I didn't like the way he spoke to you earlier, Richard confessed, without aggression. He made you uncomfortable. She took a deep breath. Michael always stirs up old spaces in my mind. But don't worry, she touched her husband's hand. I married you today, not the past. Richard gave a faint smile, but Juanita didn't take her eyes off Michael. The band was playing a soft tune when Michael finally stood up. The simple, almost silent gesture sent a ripple through the hall. Jasmine stood up quickly, as if she instinctively knew she needed to stop him. "Dad!" "Wait," she said, approaching. He paused for a moment. "I can't wait any longer." "At least wait until after the couple's dance," she pleaded. Michael looked at his daughter with deep affection. "Jasmine, there are things you all need to know. Things that shouldn't have stayed hidden in a pocket for so long." She stepped forward. "But today?" At her wedding, his expression grew bitter, precisely because it's today, and he kept walking. Jasmine returned to the table, unsure of what to do. Juanita noticed his movement first. When Michael walked between the tables, discreetly but firmly, she left a conversation with two friends and intercepted his path. "Michael," she called, firmly, "let's talk outside." "Now." He stopped. For a few seconds, neither of them breathed. Then he replied, "All right." She led her ex-husband to a side door that opened to a small garden illuminated by low lights. The cold night air contrasted with the emotional heat between them. As soon as the door closed, Juanita turned to him. "What do you think you're doing?" Michael didn't answer immediately. He opened the envelope, took out the yellowed letter, and held it between his fingers. "This," he said, "is what I should have given you before everything fell apart." Juanita looked at him with a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. "After decades, you really think there's something I still need to hear from you today?" He took a deep breath. "It's not for you. It's for our children." Despite the coldness she tried to maintain, that sentence hit her like a stone. "What's in that letter, Michael?" He didn't answer. Instead, he offered her the letter. Juanita hesitated, but took it. She unfolded it slowly. "Read the first line," and her face turned pale. "No," she whispered. Michael stepped forward. "I tried to give it to you before. Twice. You never read it." "This can't," her voice faltered. "This doesn't make sense." His eyes were fixed on her reaction. "It makes perfect sense, Juanita. You just never wanted to look." She held the letter with trembling hands, took a deep breath, read it again, and for the first time that night, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. A deep, visceral fear, rooted in the past. "Why?" she whispered, staring at the paper. "Why did you keep this for so long?" Michael swallowed hard. "Because I was ashamed." The word echoed in the garden. A giant word. From a man who rarely admitted weakness. Juanita gripped the letter. This changes everything," she murmured, almost inaudibly. "It doesn't change your marriage today," he said, with rare sincerity. "But it changes the story he pointed toward the hall, have believed for more than 20 years. She looked up. "You can't show this now. Not here. Not today." Michael clenched his jaw. "They deserve to know the real reason I left back then." Juanita's eyes filled with tears. Not tears of love, nor longing. Tears of deep memories. "Michael, for God's sake, some truths weren't meant to be revealed in public." "This one was," he replied. "And it's too late to keep hiding." She stepped forward, almost touching his chest. "If you do this today, you'll destroy our family. Not just my party. You'll destroy everything." Michael breathed deeply. The truth already destroyed us before. The silence in the garden seemed to freeze the air. Juanita finally spoke, with real pain. "You don't need to redeem yourself today." Michael looked at her deeply. "I'm not trying to redeem myself." It took her a few seconds to understand. And then she realized, his expression wasn't that of a man trying to clear his name, nor someone trying to relive the past, nor someone seeking reconciliation. It was worse. Much worse. His expression was of someone who had finally decided to confess something that had haunted him for decades and was ready to face the consequences. "Michael," she said, her voice breaking, "you can't tell them. Please." He looked away for a moment. "I have to." "Not today," she pleaded. "Please. I'm begging you as the mother of your children. Don't shake their world on my wedding day." Michael breathed slowly. His eyes were glassy, but his tone wasn't aggressive, nor vengeful. It was devastated. Juanita, I didn't come here to ruin anything. I came because, if I don't say this today, I never will. She gripped the letter tightly. Then let me say it, she whispered. Michael looked up, surprised. I'll take the blame. I'll explain. I'll protect them from this pain. He shook his head. It's not yours to carry, Juanita. It's my responsibility. She stepped closer, now crying. And I forgive you, Michael. He finally replied, Juanita, they need to know I didn't leave because I got tired of you. That sentence hit like a knife. She closed her eyes. Stop, please, stop. But he continued. They need to know I left because I discovered something that completely destroyed me. Her breathing froze, and that I, his voice cracked, didn't have the strength to face you back then. Juanita let the letter fall to the ground. Michael, don't do this. He looked at her, resolute. I'm not asking for permission anymore. And he stepped toward the door. The first major revelation was about to happen. And nothing, absolutely nothing, could stop it now. The glass door opened, and the muffled sound of music escaped into the garden, carrying laughter, conversations, and the joyful movement of the reception. However, as Michael crossed the threshold back into the hall, everything seemed to shift in texture. As if the light grew heavier, the colors more dense, the air harder to breathe. Juanita stood at the door, one hand on the frame, her face overcome with a mix of despair and helplessness. She knew that nothing, absolutely nothing, would stop Michael from doing what he had planned. He wasn't walking fast. He wasn't walking confidently. He walked like someone carrying a sentence. As he moved between the tables, some guests turned, sensing the strange atmosphere in the air. Smiles faded, voices quieted, and a kind of silent wave passed through the hall, the kind that comes before a storm. Jasmine stood up immediately. Dad, she began, her voice trembling for the first time that night. Michael held her arm gently. Jasmine, sit down. I promise you will understand. She opened her mouth to protest, but something in his eyes disarmed her. It wasn't anger. It was pain. An old, deep pain she had never seen displayed so nakedly. He let his hand slide slowly down the sleeve of her dress, like a father releasing a child before a difficult dive. Jeffrey stood beside his sister. What are you going to do? He asked quietly. Tell the truth, Michael answered. Marcus, more impulsive, more like his mother, took a step forward. This isn't the moment. Michael looked at him with a silent kind of respect. It was never the moment, Marcus. That's why everything stayed like this. Frozen, in time. The master of ceremonies was climbing the stage again, ready to introduce the next round of toasts, when he noticed that half the ballroom was staring at one single point. Michael Jordan walking toward the main table. He swallowed hard. Ladies and gentlemen, in a moment we'll have the next speech. Please feel free to. His voice vanished, crushed by the symbolic weight of the figure approaching the heart of the celebration. Richard saw the movement, and his instinct was immediate. He stood up, positioning himself beside his wife, as if his own body could protect her from something he still didn't understand. Michael, he said, with tense calm, this is a very delicate moment. If you'd like to talk, we can go backstage. Michael didn't take his eyes off Juanita. This isn't with you. Juanita, tears clinging to her lashes, took a step forward. Michael, please, I beg you, don't do this here. He inhaled deeply. I tried to give you this letter twice, Juanita, twice. You never wanted to read it. Time passed. And now, I can't hide this from our children anymore. Richard looked at his wife, confused. What letter is this? Juanita squeezed her eyes shut, as if trying to hold the last emotional barrier together. A letter that should have been burned, she whispered. Michael raised the envelope, drawing the attention of several nearby tables. Truth isn't burned, he said. Only delayed. Jasmine, Jeffrey, and Marcus hurried toward the main table. Guests made space, without thinking. Some out of curiosity, others out of fear. Others, because they sensed they were about to witness something far too intimate, too big, impossible to ignore. Marcus touched his mother's arm. "Mom, what is happening?" he asked, voice low but desperate. Juanita looked at her oldest son as if she carried centuries behind her eyes. "A part of our story," she said. "A part I never wanted you to know." Michael opened the envelope slowly, with the tenderness of someone reopening a wound. "Not because you were ashamed, Juanita," he said, without raising his voice, "but because you knew this would break them." Those words rippled through the room like shockwaves. Jeffrey removed his glasses and rubbed his face. "Dad, what exactly are you talking about?" Michael breathed in, as if pulling courage from the oldest fibers of his soul. "The real reason our marriage ended." A thick silence fell over the ballroom. Richard stepped back, realizing this wasn't about him. Not yet. Juanita covered her mouth with both hands. "No, not like this. Please." But Michael continued. He unfolded the letter and stared at the lines yellowed by time. "I wrote this on the day I found out," he said. "The day our family changed forever. I kept it, believing that one day you, Juanita, would read it. But you never wanted to. I don't blame you. I couldn't face this paper for years myself." He looked at the children. "Today, I don't want to hide anything from you anymore." Marcus stepped forward. "Dad, please, don't do this in the middle of my mother's wedding party." Michael lifted his face, firm. "Truth doesn't respect special dates, Marcus. It shows up when it must." The sentence dropped like a hammer. He began reading. "Juanita, I discovered something that shattered my ground. Something that stole my breath. Something I never imagined could happen in our home." Juanita's face tightened in silent despair. "I know you tried to tell me. I know you tried somehow, but..." She squeezed her eyes shut, tears sliding down. "When I found out, I just couldn't stay inside that house. I couldn't look at you with the same strength. I failed. I failed." The children exchanged confused looks. Jasmine touched her father's hand. "What exactly did you find out?" Michael didn't look away, but before he could continue, Richard placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "That's enough. They deserve to know, of course, but not like this. Not tonight. This is our celebration. You can settle this tomorrow, privately, like adults." Michael turned slowly, meeting the groom's eyes. "Richard, I didn't come here to ruin your wedding. But this story doesn't belong only to the two of you." Richard breathed deeply, trying to control his discomfort. "Then who does it belong to?" Michael pointed at the children. "Them." Jasmine swallowed hard. Jeffrey lowered his gaze. Marcus flushed with anxiety. Juanita finally regained a bit of her voice. "Michael," she pleaded, "if you do this now, you will hurt our children in a way that cannot be undone." He inhaled again. "Sometimes, Juanita, a wound only heals when it's cleaned." He returned to the letter, made an effort to continue. "When I realized what was happening, when I understood what you were carrying alone, I felt smaller than everything, unable to be the husband you needed in that moment. We. Juanita placed a hand over her chest. Richard, increasingly tense, asked, "What was she carrying alone, Michael?" Michael looked at him, and for the first time that night, his expression contained neither anger nor challenge. It held tragedy, something I should have faced with her, but didn't. The children were about to speak when one of the bridesmaids tripped on the dance floor, knocking over a glass. A loud, high, sharp sound sliced the tension for a millisecond. No one reacted to the glass. Everyone reacted only to Michael. He closed the letter for a moment, pressing the edges between his fingers as if the paper burned. "The reason for our divorce wasn't routine, wasn't distance, wasn't incompatibility," he said. "It was something much deeper. Something Juanita carried alone because she thought she was protecting me. But in the end, it only made me pull away when I should have stayed the most." Jasmine's voice shook. "Dad, what happened?" Michael faced his daughter. "You deserve to know what destroyed our family." Juanita, crying, finally broke through the last barrier. "Michael, please, don't read the next part. I'm begging you." He closed his hand around the paper, breathed. lifted his eyes to the entire room, and said, "Then you say it." The sentence landed like a verdict. Juanita froze, trapped between two pains, the pain of confessing and the pain of allowing him to confess. And the entire ballroom realized the truth was seconds away from emerging, and once it surfaced, no one in that room would remain the same. The whole room held its breath. The band stopped playing not because it was planned, but because the musicians instinctively felt something grave forming at the center of the celebration. The wedding, until then immaculate, turned into an emotional minefield. Richard kept one arm around his wife, trying to shield her from a weight he didn't even grasp. The children stood still in a half circle, confused, frightened, trying to assemble pieces they never imagined existed. And Michael, with the letter between his fingers, waited. "Juanita," he said, never raising his voice, "you are the one who must say it." She inhaled, but the air wouldn't come. Her hands trembled, her skin dampened, her eyes burned. It was as if she had been thrown back in time, to the exact day that secret was born, the day she always wanted to forget. But that insisted on following her in silence. "Mom," whispered Jasmine, holding her mother's arm. "What is happening?" Juanita looked at her three children, one by one, and for the first time that entire night, they saw the strongest woman in their lives break. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, trying to find a voice inside the abyss she had guarded for decades. She tried to say, but her throat locked. "I never wanted to talk about this. Never." Michael took only one step closer, respecting her emotional distance but pressing her with the truth. They deserve it, and she finally understood. He wouldn't leave without the truth being told. Nor did she want to run anymore. The music had stopped. The waiters were frozen. The children had been quietly taken to another area. Even the most distant guests, who barely knew the family, had realized they were about to witness something intimate, too big, too heavy, maybe even too forbidden. "If you prefer," said Richard to the children, "we can go to another room." Michael responded first. "No. This needs to be said where it all began, here, in front of the entire family." Marcus clenched his fists. "Dad, you're overreacting. This is a wedding. Our mother's wedding. It's not the time to air dirty laundry." Fam. 1. Michael raised the letter. "This isn't dirty laundry. It's truth. And this truth explains decades of pain you all felt without knowing where it came from." Those words hit the three siblings. Because yes, they felt it. All through childhood, through adolescence, through the divorce. There was something hurting the family. But no one knew what. Juanita finally spoke. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Jeffrey narrowed his eyes. "Sorry for what, Mom?" She looked at Michael, asking for strength. For the first time, he reached out his hand. Not to embrace her, not to touch her, but to support her courage. And it worked. Juanita took a deep breath and began. "Your marriage seemed perfect when we were kids," said Jasmine. "What happened?" Juanita closed her eyes, letting tears fall. "No. It wasn't perfect, Jasmine. We tried to look perfect to protect you. And to protect his image too." Michael didn't react. He didn't deny it, nor did he agree. She continued, "But the real reason for the end of our marriage wasn't fighting. It wasn't routine. It wasn't cheating." She looked at the three, and then said with the weakest voice she had ever used in her life, "It was because I lost a baby." Silence. Complete silence. The word echoed between the tables, hitting the room like emotional hail. Jasmine put her hand over her mouth. Jeffrey turned pale. Marcus shook his head, as if his mind refused to process it. "What?" murmured Jasmine. "When?" Juanita tried to breathe. "I was pregnant. You didn't know. It was before the separation. Long before." Michael added, "I found out when it was already too late." The air seemed to vanish from the room. Richard stood completely still. Even without having lived that part of her life, the pain was almost tangible. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" asked Jeffrey, his voice shaking. Michael answered before Juanita could. "Because I couldn't deal with it. And your mother." He looked at her. "Tried to spare me while she was falling apart." Juanita nodded, her eyes full of tears. "I thought hiding it was protecting you. And protecting him, too. Michael tightened the letter in his hand. I wrote this letter the day I found out she had lost the baby. He unfolded the page and read a small excerpt. I wasn't there. I should have been. You suffered alone, and I arrived too late, unable to comfort you, unable to take my share of it. His voice cracked. The whole room felt it. Jasmine cried. Jeffrey couldn't look at his parents. Marcus tried to stay composed, but his entire body was trembling. Richard placed his hand on his wife's back, but she gently pulled away, wanting to stand on her own. Michael continued. That moment destroyed us. Because he breathed deeply. I should have been the husband who held her up in pain. But I did the opposite. I pulled away. I ran. I didn't have the courage to carry that grief beside her. Juanita wiped her tears. He froze, she said. And so did I. And the two of us, we got lost in the same pain. And then came the part no one expected. The baby wasn't just a pregnancy, said Michael. It was an attempt at a new beginning. After difficult months, it was the hope we had to heal our wounds. Juanita nodded, sobbing. But when I lost it, she said, I couldn't look at him without feeling guilty. And he couldn't look at me without feeling regret. We both blamed ourselves. I won. The final emotional impact of that sentence was clear. The loss destroyed them both, each on one side of the same pain. Marcus took a step back, bumping into the edge of the table. You lost a baby? He repeated, his voice cracking. And you never said anything? Juanita tried to touch her oldest son, but he pulled back. I thought it wouldn't be fair to place that weight on you, she said. Jasmine, crying, approached her mother. But that would have helped us understand so much, so much. Jeffrey stood still, frozen. Richard moved, placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, a human gesture, without any competitiveness. But Michael gently pulled away. He didn't want comfort. I failed your mother, he said, looking at the children. And I failed you too. Marcus raised his voice, broken inside. Dad, this changes how we see you, how we see your marriage, how we see everything. I know, replied Michael, and that's why, today. But then Juanita stepped forward, holding the letter tightly. There's more, she said. Michael turned quickly. Juanita, she held up the open letter. You wrote that letter, but you never realized I wrote one too. The children widened their eyes. What? Asked Jasmine. Juanita looked at Michael with deep pain, not anger pain. I wrote a letter to you too. That same day. And you never saw it. Michael's ground gave way. You wrote? She nodded, tears streaming. I did. And I destroyed it before you could read it. His expression was indescribable. Shock, regret, anguish. Why? He asked in a low voice. Why did you destroy it? Juanita took a deep breath, and then said something that made the whole family tremble. Because, in that letter, I blamed you. And I didn't want you to live with that forever. Michael brought his hands to his head. The children were in absolute shock, and she added, I destroyed the letter. But I didn't destroy what I felt. I just buried it, along with everything we lost that day. A guest sobbed in the background. An elderly woman held her chest. Several people silently wiped away tears. The master of ceremonies quietly stepped off the stage, understanding that moment belonged to no script. The band remained silent, and the wedding became an emotional confessional. Michael quietly wiped his face. Juanita did the same. The children were devastated. Yet, at the same time, closer to the truth that shaped them. And the entire room waited, unsure if the story ended there, or if that was just the beginning. Michael took a deep breath and said something that gave everyone chills. That's not all. Juanita's eyes widened. Michael, don't. He turned to her, in pain. The loss wasn't the only secret from that period. There was something else, something even you don't know, that I found out years later. The air turned cold. Richard tried to intervene. You've all been through enough tonight. Please, stop. But Michael replied firmly, I didn't come here to destroy anyone's marriage. I came to free my family from a silence that should have never existed. Juanita took a step back, because she understood. What was about to emerge was no longer about grief. It was about something she herself didn't even know. And for a moment, she felt genuine fear about what Michael was about to say. For a few seconds, no one moved. Michael's last words lingered in the air like thick smoke. The loss wasn't the only secret from that period. There was something else, something even you don't know, that I found out years later. The entire room seemed to take an invisible step back. Even those who knew nothing about the story felt the ground shake. Juanita, now officially known as Juanita Veron, after years away from the Jordan surname, held the edge of the table to keep from losing her balance. Her eyes scanned Michael's face as if seeing a stranger inside the man she had loved for half her life. "What do you mean by that?" Her voice came out broken, almost childlike. Michael took a deep breath. "That, the way you remember that day, isn't the whole story." Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between them, an old reflex to protect his mother. "That's enough, Dad. You've stirred up too much already. We get it. You lost a baby. You both suffered. You couldn't handle it. Done. There's no need to dig further." Michael looked at his son, and there was such deep exhaustion in his gaze that Marcus went quiet. "I also wanted to stop there," he confessed. "I really wanted to believe that it was just our failure, our pain, our choices. But that wasn't all." Jasmine wiped her face, still crying. "What exactly are you talking about?" Michael ran a hand over the back of his neck, like he used to before tough decisions on the court. An automatic, nervous gesture. "Do you remember that time when I was always traveling? Games, commitments, interviews, that life that seemed to have no space for anything else?" Jeffrey nodded. "The house felt like a hotel," he murmured. "You'd come and go." Michael didn't deny it. It was exactly during that phase that everything happened. He looked away to some vague spot in the room, but in his mind, he traveled back years and years. "Back then," he began, "I thought I controlled everything. Schedules, training, contracts, press, sponsors. My calendar was a machine. I had people handling every minute of my day. I just played. And obeyed." He looked at Juanita. "You called me." She stood still. She knew exactly which day he meant. Her silence confirmed it. "I called many times," Juanita murmured, her voice hoarse. "I was bleeding. Michael. I couldn't stand up. I thought I was going to faint alone in the bathroom. I called you, your team, everyone. Your assistant said you were in a meeting with sponsors. That you'd call me back later." His eyes closed for a moment. "That's the part of the story you know," he replied. "The part we've told for years. You tried. I didn't answer. I arrived too late. You lost the baby, alone. And I failed as a husband." Jasmine wiped away fresh tears. "That wasn't what happened." Michael took a few seconds to respond. "It was partially." The words landed heavy. "Partially?" Marcus repeated, incredulous. Michael nodded. "Because I believed that too. I believed for a long time that I had simply ignored the call, that I had chosen a contract over my family. And believe me, I hated myself for that." He let out a humorless laugh. "When I arrived at the hospital after the meeting, I saw you unconscious, pale." The doctors explained briefly. No one wanted to go into details. "I was angry at myself, at God, at the world, and I didn't have the courage to ask anything else." Juanita looked at him, confused. "That's what happened." "That's what I thought had happened," he corrected. The entire room leaned emotionally into that sentence. "A few years ago," Michael continued, "I met again with a man who worked with me back then. Personal security. You might remember him. Juanita. Caldwell." She frowned, trying to recall. "The one who used to stand at our front door, in a dark suit?" Jeffrey murmured. Michael nodded. "That's him." His voice changed. It dropped, became heavier. "I met him at a clinic. He was very sick. No family around. And maybe because we both knew it would be one of our last meetings, He decided to talk. The kids shifted in their seats. Talk about what? Jasmine asked. Michael swallowed hard. That day. Your calls were blocked. The impact was immediate. What? Marcus exploded. What do you mean? Juanita whispered. Blocked, Michael repeated. He told me he received direct orders from my former agent and a sponsor executive. Nothing could interrupt that meeting. It was a crucial encounter, with big names, obscene money on the table. The instruction was clear. If the family calls, say he'll return later. If it's an emergency, send it to the team infirmary, but don't take him from the table. Jasmine again covered her mouth. No. And you? Michael looked at Juanita. You weren't calling the infirmary. You were calling me. Directly. Her knees nearly gave out. Michael, you didn't answer. I didn't know it was ringing. He replied. My phone was with Caldwell. He held the device, filtered everything. That's how it always was. But that day, he followed orders no one ever told you. Or me. I or me. Richard pulled up a chair, almost pushing Juanita into it. She didn't resist. She needed support. He told me you were in a meeting. She repeated, as if trying to force the past to align. I remember his voice. He said you'd arrive later, because that's what they told him to say, Michael explained. Tell her he'll return after the commitment. Word for word. Marcus looked ready to break something. So you didn't know she was going to the hospital? He asked, almost accusing. Michael met his eyes, letting his son see all the guilt he still carried. I knew she wasn't well. I knew the pregnancy was risky. I knew there was danger. But on that specific day, I didn't hear the phone ring. I didn't see missed calls. No alerts. In my world, there was just an endless meeting. And, when I left, a message saying, my wife was at the hospital. He closed his eyes, the memory still painful. I dropped everything and went. Too late. For me, I had been negligent. I should have checked. Called myself. Gone back earlier. I blamed myself for not insisting. But I didn't know that, in practice, someone was deciding for me what I'd know, and what I wouldn't. The shock on the kids' faces was absolute. No. Juanita murmured, shaking her head as if trying to push away this new version. It can't be. That changes everything I lived through. Michael stepped a little closer, but still respected the space. You spent years thinking I chose a contract over you, that I saw your name on the screen and chose to ignore it. And I spent years believing I had done that, because I didn't have the courage to revisit the truth properly. She looked at her ex-husband with a mix of anger, disbelief, and pain. And now you come here, on my wedding day, to say. Her voice came out hard, fractured. Michael took a long pause before responding. I'm not saying I didn't mess up, he said firmly. I messed up. When I accepted to live in a system where I had no control over who could reach me. I messed up when I let my own home become an office extension. I failed as a husband when, after what happened, I hid behind work instead of grieving with you. None of that is erased. He inhaled, but there's a part of this story that doesn't belong to you or me, a part built by other hands. And I don't want you, he looked at his kids, to keep remembering that time as if it was all because we lacked love or care. Juanita's face crumbled again. I spent years angry, she confessed. Full of hatred. Not because you were out there playing, but because of the man I imagined in here. Someone who saw my name and turned his face away. Someone who let me bleed alone because he had more important things to deal with. Her fingers gripped her dress fabric. That man, she whispered, was the one I had to kill inside myself to move on. His tears finally came. He existed. In our minds, Michael said. Because we never had the courage to go all the way back and ask, who answered that phone? Who decided I didn't need to know? Jasmine wiped her tears, trying to make sense of the flood of information. Did you confront that agent? She asked, with unexpected anger. Michael nodded. I did. Much later. When Caldwell spoke to me in that hospital room, years later, he cried. Said he never forgave himself for following that order. I traced the whole chain. Emails, reports, internal instructions. And I found it. The silence was heavy. You had proof? Jeffrey asked, almost whispering. I did, Michael confirmed. And I used it. Not for revenge, but to make sure no one would ever again do something like that in the name of my brand. I cut contracts, ended partnerships, changed the people around me. But there was one person I never had the courage to face with that truth. He looked at Juanita. You. Why? She asked. Why did you never tell me? The hall waited along with her for the answer. Michael took a deep breath, searching for words. Because when I found out, you had already built a life away from me. You had picked yourself up, rebuilt yourself, raised the kids, found your own strength. It seemed like stirring all that would be opening the grave of a grief you had finally managed to bury. He looked at the children, then back at her. And I was also afraid of seeming like I was trying to clean my image too late. It would have sounded too convenient, too cowardly. The honesty of that sentence was almost painful. I pictured you hearing it and saying, "Oh, so now it's someone else's fault? How convenient, Michael." He smiled without humor. So I stayed silent. Juanita kept wiping her face over and over. I would have said that, she admitted, with brutal sincerity. Back then, I would have. I was too hurt, too attached to my version of the story. She took a deep breath, feeling the impact of that insight. But today, I don't know. A guest, in the back, whispered to another. They're rewriting an entire marriage in front of us. The sentence sounded like an exaggeration, but it wasn't. Marcus, who had always handled the divorce with contained resentment, looked at his father differently. So, you didn't walk out on Mom that day, just because you didn't care about what was happening? Michael looked at him in pain. I left unintentionally. And then I really left, when I couldn't face what had happened. I'm not trying to erase it, Marcus. I just don't want you to spend the rest of your life believing a distorted version, like I saw her name on the phone and chose not to answer. Jasmine sniffled. I grew up with that image in my head, she confessed. Even without anyone saying it. It just seemed obvious. You on top of the world, Mom at home going through everything, and, I don't know. We filled in the blanks with the worst. Jeffrey, silent until then, spoke softly. Me too. An old pain, shared but never verbalized, finally had a name. Richard, who until that moment had watched everything trying to stay on the sidelines, stepped closer. He looked at Juanita not with jealousy, but with respect for something he now understood deeply. I didn't know any of this, he confessed. She looked at her new husband, teary-eyed. I didn't really know either, she admitted. I retold this story so many times in my mind, until it became an absolute fact. He left me alone because I wasn't a priority. I rebuilt myself on top of that pain. And now I'm finding out that part of it was manipulation, system, commercial interests. Michael raised his hand. The final responsibility is still mine, he stated. I chose to live that way. I agreed to be treated like a product. I let them interfere in our home. So even knowing there were people acting in the shadows, I still blame myself. But I don't want you all to hate each other based on an incomplete lie anymore. The mood, though devastating, began to shift. It didn't get lighter, but it became more honest. It was as if everyone in the hall had walked together through a dark corridor, and now saw, in the distance, some possibility of light, even if faint. But Michael wasn't done yet. He looked at the letter in his hands, folded it carefully, put it in his pocket, and then said, all of this explains why I disappeared emotionally, why our marriage cracked, why you grew up with gaps. But it's not the last piece. A new tension took over the room. There's more? Marcus exclaimed, exhausted. Richard raised his hands, as if begging for a break. This is already more than any family should face on a day like this. You can continue this another time. The party has already turned into a group therapy session. Maybe it's time to stop. Michael looked at him with respect. I understand. But what's left is not just about the past. Everyone held their breath. What's left to say, he continued, is about what's going to happen to our family from now on. With you, Juanita. With you, Richard. And with you, 3. He pointed to the children. Juanita felt a chill run down her spine. What are you planning to do, Michael? He took a deep breath, weighing each word. Something I should have done a long time ago. Publicly take responsibility for what I caused, and give back something that should have never been taken from you. No one understood. Give back what? Jasmine asked. Michael looked at the table where the wedding documents, personalized chocolates, envelopes with keepsakes, and a discreet leather folder sat beside the glasses, and fixed his gaze there. The right to choose your own story, he replied. The sentence seemed too cryptic at that moment, but as the hall tried to absorb it, he walked slowly toward the folder, under everyone's watchful eyes. Inside, it was something that connected past, present, and a future no one expected to share in that way. The wedding wasn't over yet. Dinner hadn't been served. The official dance hadn't started. But before any celebration, one last reckoning with truth remained. And what Michael would do next wouldn't just surprise the guests. It would forever change how that family existed from that night on. The leather folder had rested on the main table since the beginning of the party. Discreet, almost invisible among the floral arrangements and personalized wedding favors. No one had paid attention to it. Until now, as Michael walked toward the table, everyone followed every step. It looked like a slow-motion scene. The music hung suspended in the air, frozen between notes that dared not play. Dad? What is that? Jasmine asked. Voice choked. Michael didn't answer. He simply moved to the table and calmly opened the folder, a metallic zipper sliding with a sound that seemed to cut through the silence like a knife. Juanita stood up abruptly. Michael, I have no idea what you brought here, but if it's something that's going to ruin this day, I'm asking you, please, don't do this. He looked at her, and something in his expression, maybe regret, maybe courage, made her voice falter. I didn't come to destroy anything, he said, quietly. I came to return. Marcus jolted. Return what? Michael pulled a bundle of documents from the folder. They weren't loose sheets. They were several sealed envelopes, each with a handwritten name. One for Marcus, another for Jeffrey, another for Jasmine, a fourth, larger envelope with the name Juanita Veron, and a fifth, the only one without a name, marked only with the letter M. Jasmine covered her mouth. You wrote letters to each of us? Michael nodded. I wrote them a few years ago, since I found out what really happened that day. Jeffrey stepped forward, stunned. Why? Because... Michael took a deep breath, his voice losing strength for the first time in a long while. These letters aren't apologies. They're responsibilities. The entire hall grew even quieter. I don't want you to learn to forgive without understanding, he continued. Nor do I want you to carry guilt that isn't yours. Each of you has a version of what happened in our home, but none of them is complete. In these letters, I wrote everything, in detail, truthfully, no glamour, no damage control. Marcus swallowed hard. This should have been given to us years ago. I know, Michael replied. And that's why I brought them today. Because everything that happened tonight, everything that came to light, deserves closure. You deserve to move on without the ghosts I helped create. Juanita stared at the folder like facing an open wound. I didn't know any of this, she murmured. You wrote everything? Not everything, he corrected. But everything essential, so you'd never again have to imagine worse versions of the truth. The imagination of a wounded family is cruel, and I never managed to get you out of that emotional maze. Jasmine stepped forward, cautiously. Dad, what's in the M letter? Michael took a deep breath. That one is for myself. Everyone was confused. For you? Jeffrey repeated. It's a letter I wrote with no intention of giving it to anyone. A letter about the man I was. About the decisions I made. about the fears I carried, about the things I destroyed without noticing. I wrote it so I wouldn't lie to myself, and to never forget what I lost trying to carry the world on my shoulders. There was a vulnerability there that few had ever seen in him. Marcus shook his head. This is heavy. It's necessary, Michael replied. The table stood before everyone. The envelopes aligned, like small pieces of the past ready to finally find their owners. Juanita couldn't take her eyes off the envelope with her name. The past, she thought, shouldn't be written on paper. Richard touched her shoulder. Love, you don't have to read anything now. I know, she replied, with a strength that came from deep within. But I need to receive it. That's different. The groom fell silent. He understood that this was an emotional battle he couldn't join, nor control. It was her past with another man. A past that now became something concrete, tangible, almost alive. Jasmine was the first to touch one of the envelopes. Marcus, Jeffrey, we need to take ours. The brothers slowly approached, as if afraid the ground was about to collapse. Michael handed out the envelopes one by one. When Marcus took his hands trembled so much the paper nearly slipped. Is this going to hurt? He asked, not hiding his fear. Michael replied with devastating honesty. Yes, but it will also heal. But there was something more. Something Michael hadn't revealed yet. He picked up Juanita's envelope and held it for a few seconds before handing it over. This letter, he said, voice cracking, is different from the others. Juanita looked up, trying to decipher his expression. Different how? He took a deep breath. Because it's the only one I ever thought about destroying. A chill ran through everyone who heard it. Michael continued, looking into his ex-wife's eyes. I wrote this letter for you on the same day I wrote the letter to myself. It was after I found out about the blocked calls. After I realized the blame wasn't entirely mine. After I understood how much my silence hurt you. He swallowed hard. I wrote things I never had the courage to say. Things I felt. Things you should have heard years ago. But when I finished, I looked at the paper and thought, who am I to give you this? After everything. So I kept it. I kept it for years. Not knowing what to do, Juanita held the envelope carefully, as if it were glass. And why bring it now? Today? Michael took a deep breath, the kind that braces the chest for a blow. Because you deserve to get married free, Juanita. Free from me. Free from my shadow. Free from what you believed to be true. Free from guilt that was never yours. Free from pain you carried alone because you believed I had abandoned you by choice. She bit her lower lip, trying to hold back tears. Michael. But he raised his hand, asking for a moment. I never truly asked for your forgiveness. Not with words. Not with gestures. Not with honesty. I just pulled away, trying to fix the world, when the one who needed fixing was me. She pressed the envelope to her chest. I waited for this for years, she confessed. And when I stopped waiting, I finally managed to live. I moved on. And now, you show up with all of this. Her voice broke, and stir everything that had gone quiet. Michael stepped just close enough so no one else could hear. Juanita, my intention was never to hurt you today, but to set you free. She closed her eyes, as heavy tears fell. Then why does it hurt so much? He answered with a sincerity that cut through the air. Because healing hurts more than the wound when you spend too long pretending it doesn't exist. Before anyone could react, someone tapped a glass on the microphone. Tin, tin, tin. Everyone turned. It was the master of ceremonies, completely pale. Ladies and gentlemen, he stammered. We need to proceed with the event. With the couple's first dance. The band began to play, but no one moved. Richard looked at Juanita. She looked at the children. The children looked at their father. And Michael looked at all of them. He took a deep breath. I said there was still one last piece, he said, now firmly. Something that would change the way we all see this family. The tension returned instantly. Michael, please, Juanita begged. Exhausted. Not today. Please. But he looked directly at his 3 children. Before you open those letters, before you interpret a single word, There's something I need to say while looking into your eyes. Jasmine stepped forward. Jeffrey, too. Marcus joined his siblings. The entire room fell into absolute silence. What is it? Jasmine asked in a low voice. Michael took a deep breath and then said, the loss of the baby wasn't the end. What happened afterward was even worse. And I found out too late. Juanita turned pale as paper. Michael, don't do this. He closed his eyes and revealed, you didn't lose one baby. You lost two. The world seemed to stop. What? Jasmine whispered. Jeffrey brought a hand to his face. Marcus staggered backward, and Juanita collapsed into her chair. Michael continued, his voice breaking for the first time in front of the children. It wasn't a common loss. It was a double loss. And no one told you, Juanita, because they didn't want you to carry that alone. The doctors made decisions that day. Juanita's tears fell uncontrollably. No, no, no. One of the babies. Michael trembled. You never even knew existed. And I only found out a few years ago. The entire hall collapsed into shock. Now, the story had crossed an irreversible line, and everything, absolutely everything, would change from that moment on. No music played again. No waiter moved. No guest dared to breathe deeply. Michael's revelation, you lost two babies, hit like an emotional bomb at the center of the reception, and the blast still echoed among the tables, spreading like an invisible wave of shock. Juanita, still seated, ran a trembling hand over her temples, trying to process. But her body didn't keep up. Every word seemed to claw its way through her, opening old wounds. Two? She repeated, her voice failing. No, that's not possible. I was only pregnant with one. I only felt one. Michael closed his eyes, as if being pierced by that pain too. You were expecting twins, Juanita, he said, softly, without haste or drama. Late monochorionic twin pregnancy. No obvious symptoms at the beginning. One of the babies was smaller, much smaller. She brought her hand to her mouth. A sob escaped. Jasmine knelt beside her mother, hugging her shoulders like someone trying to keep a person from collapsing into the abyss. Mom, breathe, she murmured, eyes flooded. Jeffrey stepped closer, touching his sister's hand. Marcus was frozen, unable to move. Richard, seeing the bride in that state, approached, trying to help. But Juanita pushed his hand away, not out of rejection, but because the pain exploding inside her came from a place where no one, except Michael, could reach. Michael took a deep breath. I found out years later, he explained. You didn't know because the doctors made hard decisions. They thought they were sparing you. And in a way, they spared me too. But by doing that, they created a wound that never healed. That's a lie, Juanita whispered. That's impossible. I would have felt it. I would have known. You wouldn't have, he replied. Not like that. The early ultrasounds weren't that accurate. And back then, you were under intense stress. Traveling with me, dealing with the media, my obligations. The pregnancy was delicate from the start. And it's trusted the doctors. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears running down her cheeks. They never told me anything except the baby didn't make it. Because one of them still did. Michael completed. The silence became even more cruel. The smaller one had already stopped developing weeks earlier, he continued. In cases like that, sometimes the body reabsorbs the fetus. It's a sad, rare process. But it happens. They didn't want to traumatize you further, and they thought telling you there was only one would be enough. Juanita felt the world spin. I never knew. Michael slowly knelt in front of her, but didn't touch her. He just stayed there, close enough for her to feel she wasn't alone in that pain. I found out because I requested my old medical records, he said. Too late. But I asked. And when I read them, he swallowed hard. It felt like our darkest years finally made sense. Jasmine sobbed loudly. Jeffrey turned his back, hands over his face. Marcus finally let a heavy tear fall. So, Jasmine tried to speak, but her voice trembled too much. When you lost the baby, it was actually 2? Michael nodded slowly. Yes. Jeffrey turned around, his face devastated. That means... Michael looked at his children with silent pain. Yes. Marcus stepped forward, but his legs failed. He leaned on the edge of a table. Everything we went through, he said. All the tension, the distance, the divorce, the silence. It all started because you two were dealing with grief. Double grief. And didn't even know it? Michael confirmed. We were trying to breathe underwater and didn't even know why. Those words devastated everyone. Juanita clutched the envelope to her chest, as if that could keep her from completely falling apart. Why? She murmured. Why did no one ever tell me? How did they think that was protection? I could have cried properly. I could have processed the grief. I could have understood why I felt so empty afterward. I thought I was going crazy. That something was wrong with me. That I was overreacting. Michael closed his hand around the letter. You missed something you didn't even know existed, he said. Your body knew. Your mind didn't. And that conflict tore us apart inside. I had no way to help you. You had no way to explain it to me. It was like trying to survive the night without knowing morning existed. She wept in silence, holding nothing back. I would have given them names, she whispered, her voice breaking. I would have picked out clothes. I would have... Michael closed his eyes, feeling his own chest rip open. And you did love them, he replied. Even without knowing, even without realizing. You carried them, and you grieved for them. Alone, thinking your pain was too much. But it wasn't. It was... exact. Juanita touched Michael's face with her fingertips, not as a couple, not with nostalgia, but with humanity. You deserve to know too. He slowly opened his eyes. I know. The children stepped closer. So, Jeffrey said weakly, none of you are entirely to blame? Not you, Dad. Not you, Mom. Not the hospital. Not the team. It's all of it? Michael nodded. Yes. And that's what makes it so heavy. It's not just one person's fault. It's a mix of bad decisions, silences, secrets, misplaced protection, and misunderstood pain. Jasmine wiped her nose. Is that why you two grew so distant? That's why, Michael confirmed. Your pain was born from the pain we hid, and it remained nameless for years. And when pain has no name, it becomes a monster. Another wave of tears overcame Juanita. I thought you chose basketball over me. I thought I wasn't enough. I thought you didn't want our family anymore. I hated you for things you never knew, I thought. Michael lowered his head. And I thought you blamed me for everything. That you'd given up on me. I thought I had ruined our lives. So, instead of staying, I hid in my work, thinking you preferred it that way. We would rees. She shook her head. I preferred you, he replied, his voice faltering. I know that now. Some guests were crying. Others held their partners' hands. Others were stunned to be witnessing something so intimate and deeply human. But no one moved. No one interrupted. No one dared say that this was not appropriate for a wedding. Because everyone there understood that wedding would only truly matter if the past was exorcised. Without that, it would be a party built on ruins. Richard, who had stayed back, finally knelt beside his wife, placing his hand over hers. He didn't try to compete. He didn't try to replace her. He didn't try to diminish Michael. He simply offered presence. Love, he said, with a gentleness that even impressed Michael. You don't have to go through this alone. I'm here. And Juanita closed her eyes, touched, and answered, with absolute sincerity, I know. And that's why I said yes to you today. Richard smiled, moved. Michael looked away, out of respect. Then Michael slowly stood up. He picked up the envelope with the letter M and placed it on the table in front of the children. This letter, he said, is for me. but it will stay with you 3. Because you need to know not only who I was, but who I tried to be, and who I want to be. From now on. Jasmine held the envelope with reverence. Dad, she whispered. Michael gently touched his daughter's face. I didn't come here to ruin your mother's wedding. I came to make sure she stepped into this new marriage as a free woman. No ghosts. No emotional curses. No half-told stories. He looked at Juanita. And you deserve to start this chapter, knowing that none of your pain went unnoticed. None of this was your fault. And nothing was easy, for me either. Juanita took a deep breath, still devastated. Did you really have to wait for my wedding to do this? Michael inhaled, deeply. I had to wait for the definitive end of us to free you from what was left of me. She remained silent, overcome by a feeling no words could describe. Michael took a step back, symbolically giving the spotlight to the newlyweds. He didn't need to say anything else. What needed to be broken was broken. What needed to be seen was seen. What needed to be said was said. Now, the story was free. And for the first time that night, the room breathed. Truly, after the revelation, the room hung in a strange state between mourning and reverence. The band remained with instruments still. The waiters held full trays, too hesitant to take a step. The guests whispered softly, as if speaking inside a temple. Juanita wiped her tears slowly, breathing as though trying to reorganize her own soul. The children remained around her, a silent circle of protection, and Michael stood a few steps back, with the calm of someone who had finally done what he avoided for half a lifetime. None of them knew how to proceed, until Richard made an unexpected decision. Richard stood up slowly. There was no anger in his eyes, no insecurity, only understanding and a weight that needed no words. He walked to the center of the room, called the master of ceremonies, and whispered something in his ear. The host, still nervous, nodded. Then he took the microphone. If I could have everyone's attention, he said, hesitantly. The groom would like to say a few words. The room froze. Some thought he'd give a resentful speech. Others feared he would end the party abruptly. But no, Richard held the microphone firmly. He looked at Juanita, looked at Michael, looked at the children. Then he said, I know many of you are shocked. So am I. But what we just witnessed wasn't destruction. It was truth. A truth that took far too long to come out. And though painful, I'd rather it emerged today than stayed buried forever. Most guests widened their eyes, surprised. No one expected such a mature gesture. Richard continued, I love this woman, and I accept everything she's lived through. I accept her past. I accept her pain. I accept her story. The whole of it. Not just the parts that suit me. He took a deep breath. She didn't marry me to run away from anything. She married me because she found a place where she could exist fully. And tonight, as hard as it has been, doesn't change that. Juanita brought her hand to her face, emotional. Richard then turned to Michael. And as for you, he said, respectfully, I won't pretend it wasn't hard to watch all this. But I also recognize that what you did here took courage. In this place, in front of all these people, and most of all, in front of your children. Michael nodded slightly. Richard concluded, the party continues. Not because we'll pretend nothing happened, but because now we know far more than we did when we arrived. And that, unbelievably, makes us more human than before. Whether or not there were applause, that moment would be etched in everyone's memory. But then, slowly, a group of guests began to clap, then another, and another. Within moments, the entire room was applauding not for the drama, not for the exposure, but for the honesty that had pierced through the night. The band resumed their instruments. A soft song began to play, not festive, not sad, just soft, as if trying to stitch torn emotions back together. The waiters began to move again. Guests stood up. Some chose to leave quietly. Others stayed, feeling they had witnessed something rare. A moment where real lives emerged from behind the formalities. Jasmine sighed deeply. I need some air. Jeffrey went with her. Marcus hesitated, then followed. Only then did Juanita and Michael stand not alone, but close enough to feel each other's presence like an old shadow. Richard remained beside her, but without intruding. Michael stepped closer slowly. "Juanita," he said, in a low tone meant for her alone. "I know you might feel I took the night too far." She breathed deeply, wiping the last traces of tears. "Michael, I don't know what to feel. Part of me wants to hug you for what you said. Part of me wants to run. And another part just wants to understand how to move forward after this." He nodded, understanding. "You don't have to decide anything today." She looked at the envelope with her name. "But I do need to read this." "When you feel ready," he replied. "Not before." Juanita nodded silently. Michael looked around. "Richard handled it better than I expected," he confessed. She smiled, though still sad. "He's always handled everything about you well. He never tried to compete. He was never afraid of your story. That's part of why I said yes." Michael looked at her new husband with sincere respect. "I can see that." He hesitated, and then said, "He's good for you." "He is," she confirmed, firmly. And that answer didn't hurt the way he imagined. It hurt like release. Across the hall, the three children finally spoke to each other. "I can't believe what we just heard," said Jasmine, still in shock. Marcus shook his head. "I spent half my life thinking our father was cold, distant, selfish. And now, I find out he was as broken as we were." Jeffrey took a deep breath. Mom, too. They were trying to survive, and they failed together. Jasmine looked at the envelopes. "Are you going to read yours today?" Marcus hesitated. I don't think I can." "Me neither," agreed Jeffrey. Jasmine held the envelope against her chest. "I want to read it. But not now. Not in the middle of all this. I'll save it." The brothers nodded. "We'll read it together," said Marcus, with unusual resolve. And there, despite the pain, a new pact was silently formed. Richard called the master of ceremonies and asked for an extra glass. Then he called Michael and Juanita's children to the center of the hall. He called his own wife, and he called Michael. When everyone was gathered, he raised his glass. "Today," he said, with a firm voice, "was supposed to be just the day I married the woman I love. But it turned into a day when all of us understood parts of our history that were hidden. Parts that explain old wounds, parts that free us, parts that heal." He turned to Michael. "And as strange as it sounds, I want to thank you." Michael stood still. "Thank you for speaking up, not for the pain it caused, but for the healing it might bring. A family can only move forward when the truth is spoken, whether beautiful or not." The room fell silent again. Richard concluded, "I didn't marry a filtered version of Juanita. I married all of her, everything she lived. And part of that is you." Then he raised his glass to the truth, to healing, and to what comes next. The glasses clinked softly. Michael hesitated, but raised his as well. The sound echoed through the hall, like the first real breath after hours. After the toast, Michael quietly stepped away, walking to a corner of the hall, where he could see everything without being seen. He watched, Juanita smiling, even through her tears. Richard beside her, respectful. The children laughing together, finally united, finally whole. And then he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. But this peace wasn't comforting. It was freeing and painful. He took the envelope marked with the letter M from his pocket, looked at the children's table, and made a silent decision. He wouldn't stay until the end of the party. It wasn't his place anymore. He had done what needed to be done. He had set free what needed to be released. He had allowed that family, the family he loved more than the world will ever know, to finally breathe. And now, it was time to let them live this new phase, without his shadow, without his mistakes, and without his unhealed absence. Michael walked slowly to the side exit of the hall. He didn't want to interrupt anything. He didn't want speeches. He didn't want goodbyes. He just wanted to leave. Quietly, but Jasmine saw him. "Dad!" she called out, emotional. Michael stopped. The three children ran to him. Jasmine hugged him tightly. Jeffrey too. Marcus took a second and then hugged him as well. Michael closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry for everything I left unfinished." Jasmine replied, "Thank you for everything you finally completed." Michael smiled a tired smile, but a true one. "I love you," he said. "We love you too," they replied in unison. He kissed each of their foreheads. And then he left, calm, without looking back. When Michael walked through the door, the music resumed. Juanita, unaware of his exit, picked up the envelope and held it in her fingers. Richard embraced her from behind. The children looked at one another, sensing that something deep had shifted in that moment. And the entire room, still in emotional shock, slowly began to understand. What they had just witnessed was not a crisis. It was a cycle closing, a chapter finally completed, a family, at last, whole in the truth, and a story full of flaws, loss, and love, finding its path to healing. The celebration was no longer about a wedding. It was about liberation. When Michael walked through the side door, the night air welcomed him with a clean silence. After hours of breathing in accumulated suffering, the cold breeze felt like relief, almost like absolution. He walked slowly to the parking lot, not because he was tired, but because he needed to absorb the night that had just happened. He no longer carried the folder. He no longer carried the letter M. He no longer carried the weight of what was never said. For the first time since 2005, he felt whole. Inside the party, little by little, the music returned to the atmosphere. It wasn't joy. It was subtlety. It was reunion. The guests danced in small, almost timid movements, as if still honoring the pain they had witnessed. Richard held Juanita by the waist at the center of the dance floor. She rested her head on his shoulder, the envelope still in her hand. "Do you want to read it?" he asked, gently. She took a deep breath. "I do. But not here." "Then where?" "In the place where it all began." Richard understood and nodded. He called Jasmine, Jeffrey, and Marcus. "Let's give your mom some space," he said, kindly. The three children agreed. Then, discreetly, Richard accompanied his wife to the garden outside the same place where Michael had made his first confession that night. The lights there were soft. The sound of the party was muffled. The stars above shone like silent witnesses. Juanita sat on a wooden bench, took a deep breath, opened the envelope, and began to read. The handwriting was steady, but had hesitations. It wasn't the writing of an athlete. It was the writing of a tired man. "Juanita, if you're reading this, it's because I finally managed to do what I avoided for years. To be honest with you, without fearing I'd seem weak." She swallowed hard. "I didn't know how to love you the way you deserved when we were young. Not because of lack of love, but because I lived as if there was always a championship about to begin, and the whole world depended on me." Richard squeezed her hand, encouraging her to continue. "When we lost the baby, or rather, when we lost the babies, you thought I chose basketball. But the truth is, I chose to run away." Juanita's tears fell silently. "To run from guilt. To run from failure. To run from everything that made me seem too human. Because being human, in our world, was forbidden." "Oh." She rested the envelope on her legs to stop trembling so much. "I suffered because of your pain, but never knew how to say it. I suffered our loss, but never knew how to cry with you. And by the time I realized, I had already lost you too." She closed her eyes. "It hurt, but it was necessary. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness. I'm writing to thank you. You raised our children with dignity, with strength, with love. You carried everything I dropped. You became everything I couldn't be." Her chest tightened. Richard wiped away a tear that had fallen onto the page. "And even if you suffered because of me, I want you to know that you were the best decision of my life. Never a mistake." She held her breath, eyes flooded. "I know you found someone who gives you what I never could. And you deserve that. You deserve peace. You deserve tenderness. You deserve to be loved fully." Her body trembled. "But I needed to give you this truth before you start this new chapter. Not to hold you back, not to confuse you, but to set you free." Juanita pressed the letter against her chest, like someone embracing a ghost one last time. "You don't have to carry any guilt anymore. None. Not because of the loss. Not because of the divorce. Not because of the sorrow that tore through our family. The blame lies with circumstances we never controlled, and my inability to say, 'I need you.'" Juanita sobbed, muffling the cry in her hand. Richard pulled her head to his chest. I loved you. Not in the perfect way the world expects. Not in the calm way you deserved. But in the only way I knew how. Today I understand it wasn't enough. But it was real. She took a deep breath, as if releasing years of pain from her chest. Live, love, begin again, and know that, somewhere, unseen by anyone, I'll be rooting for you. The letter ended without a signature, because he knew she would recognize the voice. When she finished reading, Juanita was silent for long seconds. Richard hugged her tightly. Are you okay? He asked. She breathed in. For the first time in many years, I am. Want to go back in? I do. They walked back into the hall, hand in hand, and the guests witnessed something extraordinary. A woman who had suffered, loved, cried, lost, been rebuilt, and was now being reborn before their eyes. Jasmine came running to hug her mother. Jeffrey and Marcus held her together. We love you, Mom, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. I love you too, she replied, eyes shining, yet steady. Richard smiled, and Juanita, looking at the dance floor, did something unexpected. Let's dance. The band smiled in relief. The soft music grew stronger, and the newlywed couple finally opened the dance floor. They were applauded with the heart, not out of formality. It wasn't just the celebration of a wedding. It was the celebration of a liberation. Outside the hall, sitting on a bench in the open area, Michael looked up at the sky. The moon reflected on the building's glass, casting a glow that seemed silently complicit. He had heard the music start again. He had heard applause. He had heard laughter. And he smiled. It was the sound of a family moving forward. It was the sound of a chapter closing. Marcus quietly opened the side door. Dad? Michael raised his head. What are you doing here? Go back to the party. Marcus shook his head. I just wanted to tell you something. Before you left. He took a deep breath, as if carrying 20 years of silence. When I was a teenager, I thought you didn't feel anything. That you were cold. Today I realized you just didn't know how to show it. And that changed everything for me. Michael smiled, moved. Thank you, son. I forgive you, said Marcus. Michael's eyes widened in surprise. You didn't owe me that. I know. But I needed to say it. I feel lighter. Michael opened his arms, and Marcus hugged him tightly. Then came Jasmine. Then Jeffrey. The three of them embraced their father as if stitching together the final part of a family scar. Michael watched his children walk back into the hall. The golden light lit up their faces and, for a moment, he saw them as he did in their childhood, running, laughing, calling, Daddy. He smiled. He stood up, and as he walked toward the car, he thought, now I can rest. Before getting in, he looked one last time at the hall, where his life had changed forever. The wedding wasn't his. The love was no longer his. The pain was no longer his. But the peace finally was. He got in the car, started the engine, and drove away slowly, unhurried. The night was cool, clear, silent, as if the world had finally exhaled with him.